I'm excited to have you on the show and learn more about yourself and product. So let's get things started. How did you get into product tech and all things startups?
Yeah, so I got into tech at a really early age. My dad purchased an Apple IIc computer when I was 9 years old, brought it home, and there wasn't much to do on the computer those days except to play games and program. And so I taught myself how to program at a really young age. I started building games. I did that all through high school. I had a game company which released products via shareware, where you could just release them out for free, and then if people wanted, they could send in a payment for the product. I actually got a payment from Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Apple, which was a highlight of my experience. And it was at that point that I really fell in love with technology. So ever since high school, I've been into technology, specifically consumer technology. I did my degree in computer engineering and thought I would go into software development after graduating from undergrad, but ended up at Microsoft in a product management role. At the time, Microsoft said they were going to be making a multi-billion-dollar investment in games, and they were interested in the fact that I had been building games and had a company that was publishing games. And shortly after I joined, they announced the formation of the Xbox team. So I joined as one of the first 20 or so product managers working on Xbox. I spent about 6 years at Microsoft working on both the content side and the platform side, doing a lot of thinking about multiplayer gaming and social and what that was going to look like, both in terms of how people connect as well as in terms of the types of content that people connect with. Microsoft made a pretty bold investment with the Xbox by deciding not to have a modem into the device and to really embrace broadband, which at the time was a really forward-thinking move. And so it was a great time to be at Microsoft, a great time to be in consumer technology. And since then, I've held a bunch of roles. I'm really fascinated by interesting changes in how everyday people are using technology. I spent a number of years at a startup in the social gaming space. After that, I joined TripAdvisor. I was there for about 5 years during a really interesting period in the company's history, where we were moving from a review-based site into much more of an Amazon for travel. And then from there, I felt a little bit out of touch with what was happening with younger users and how they were using social. And so I joined Facebook specifically on a team focused on teenagers and how their use of social media was changing over time and what Facebook should be doing specifically for Gen Z in order to keep people engaged in the Facebook branded products like Messenger and the main Facebook app. And then from there, I became the chief product officer for Tinder, really to help them with two things. One is to think about dating and social discovery from a Gen Z perspective and think about where that's going and help Tinder evolve in that direction. And then secondly, to really professionalize the product organization. Tinder, like a lot of fast growing companies, had grown really quickly, has a very talented team, but didn't have a lot of the typical processes and tools that a lot of product teams have in place. So I came in and brought in the product leadership team there and really did a lot of thinking about how to set up the product org to execute as efficiently and quickly as possible.
So Ravi, how big was Tinder when you joined?
So Tinder is actually a relatively small company given the size of the revenue. Today, Tinder's doing north of $1 billion a year in revenue. It was about 450 people when I joined. The product team itself was about 40 people altogether.
And before all of that, you mentioned that you studied computer science and you like games. And how was your transition from engineering to product? How was your first PM job?
It was interesting. It actually happened almost by accident. So I graduated in 1998, not to date myself. And at the time, it was right in the middle of the first web boom. So there was tons of opportunities. And I thought for sure I would go into a software engineering role. And I got to Microsoft, and the interviews at Microsoft were very different than other engineering interviews that I'd had. There was a lot of talk about functional specifications and requirements and how to think about the customer. And I found them really fascinating. And about 3/4 of the way through the day, the recruiter came in and says, I'm really sorry. We actually put you in the wrong interviews. We put you in product manager interviews, not engineering interviews. And she gave me the choice to stay in product management interviews or to go back to engineering interviews. And so I decided to stay in product management interviews. I went in for a second day of interviews, eventually got the job offer, and kind of stumbled into product management. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was so fascinated by the fact that there was this other role that was, also focused on building products, but wasn't necessarily about the engineering and more about the users and the market. And so that's the story ever since. I've spent a little bit of time outside of product. Right after leaving Microsoft, I went to business school. I did a summer of management consulting, but came right back into the product industry and have always loved that role within the tech industry and the ability to think about the customer or what the customer needs and how to build something that solves for those needs. So the rest is kind of history. I got in by accident, but I've absolutely loved the role over the course of my career.
I love that answer, and it reminds me of this famous quote from Richard Branson, founder of Virgin, when he says that if someone offers you an opportunity, just say yes, and then you figure it out. So this is a live example. They weren't wrong, definitely. So, and then another thing that I think is very common in the product management space is to say, well, you have to fall in love with the problem and not with the solution. So throughout your career, what are some of these problems that you are most passionate about?
The problems that really excite me are the ones that can change everyday people's lives. And so when I was working at Microsoft, the fact that Xbox and other computing platforms could now be a really interesting way for people to entertain themselves, and not just to entertain themselves passively in the way that you would watching TV or listening to the radio, but entertain yourself interactively and in a way that was really social, at the time was really new. And to me, was a fascinating thing to be working on because entertainment is such an important part of our lives. When I went to TripAdvisor, the thing that really excited me about TripAdvisor is the impact that travel has on people's lives is really profound. We can especially tell that now that we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. People are missing traveling. They're missing the ability to see the world and meet new people. And the opportunity for me to help TripAdvisor think about how to create a great product for people to take the limited amount of time that they have per year and have really exceptional experiences was fascinating for me. Similarly with Facebook and Tinder, technology has really fundamentally changed how people interact with each other. I think more so now and going into the future than even in the past. We've had some really interesting examples of social sort of manifesting itself in certain ways, but there's been a push and pull between what the technology can do and what people want to do and what's natural from a human relationship standpoint. And now I think we're settling into a much more human use of social and more human oriented social apps that aren't all about sharing your most intimate moments with 1,000 of your closest friends, but are more focused on meaningful relationships and meaningful interactions with the people that you care about. So I think it's a really exciting time for technology in general, in part because technology has played such a key role in helping people stay connected during a time of social distancing. And I'm excited to continue to work on problems that are really at the forefront of that. Today, I'm spending a lot of my time with a company called Sesame, which is creating a direct-to-patient healthcare marketplace and really giving patients the power to interact with doctors and other healthcare providers directly rather than having to go through an insurance company, which right now is an incredibly timely problem. We all know within the US, the healthcare system is broken. And a big reason that it's broken is because of the third-party payer system, where you have this intermediary between a very important relationship, the relationship between a patient who needs care and the provider who's giving care. And so Sesame is focused on taking the same type of marketplace strategy that has worked really successfully with Airbnb and in other places with Thumbtack and other marketplace businesses, and saying, can we create a marketplace for people to be able to get healthcare directly, which I think is a more important problem than ever, given the fact that COVID has left a lot of people, millions of people actually without insurance. And so I'm excited to take everything that I've learned about consumer experiences and use that to try and help make a better interface into the healthcare system.
And are there any other myths and misconceptions related to product management that you've seen? I guess that you mentioned when you started your career in product, the type of interviews, they were very different than the type of interviews that I'm sure you had to do when hiring other product managers for your team. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Yeah, I think the biggest myth that I see about product is for people that are not in the product job, it seems like a very sexy, cool job. And I think there's a misconception that product managers are off in their ivory tower dreaming up the next big thing without any sort of any concern for, how it gets built or how to build a business around it. And there's definitely some really creative and design oriented aspects of the job. But the actual day to day of product management, I think, like a lot of creative jobs, is much more mundane. It's about managing spreadsheets and tasks and meeting notes and project plans. I once had an engineer tell me that, I don't know why anyone would want to be a product manager. It's all the dull parts of my job without any of the exciting things that I get to do around coding and understanding how to build software systems. And so, I think that, for people who want to get into product management, it's important to recognize that there are incredibly exciting, creative, innovative aspects of the job, but it's also a job that's ultimately about leadership and coordination and communication. And the day-to-day may not be as exciting as it looks from the outside. So I think that's the biggest myth for people that are looking to get into product management, that I like to make sure people aren't coming in with the wrong perception of what the job is. It is incredibly rewarding to build products that people love, to build businesses that are really successful, and to have a seat at the table doing that in a really big way. But it's also a lot of, day-to-day work that just needs to get done, that ultimately is the ingredients to really successful, cool, sexy businesses are often the output of very mundane, day-to-day, just get it done type of work.
And I think it's good to emphasize that, because from the outside, it's usually a very different perception around the product manager. And I remember one of your tweets was something along the lines of, good product managers are not necessarily good product visionaries or product people. And also those good product people are not always the best day-to-day product managers. Was that right?
Yeah, so I think product management is an incredibly broad role. It's only gotten more broad over the years as I think technology has proliferated into many different types of businesses, many different domains. And there's a variety of different types of product managers that can fill different roles within an organization. A few months ago, I released a toolkit, which I call the Product Competency Toolkit, which is a system of 12 competencies for product managers to be able to assess themselves. They're organized into 4 different areas. The first area is product execution. The second area is customer insight. The third area is product strategy. And the fourth area is influencing people. And what I encourage product managers to do is actually plot themselves out using those competencies to understand where they're strong and what are some areas that aren't necessarily weaknesses, but might be gaps that they can fill either by growing their own skills or by complementing themselves with people who are really good at the things that are complementary to their skills. And I think when you do that, what you see is that product managers, as well as more broadly product teams, start to fit together like puzzle pieces, where you have people that are particularly good at a certain thing, generally good at lots of things, but particularly good at a certain thing, that you then match with other people who are good at a complementary thing. And then the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. And so I think that's a really important part of product management. There's certain PMs that are really good at building. They're great at the execution. There's other PMs that are really good at strategy. There's some PMs that are really good at innovation. There's other PMs that are really good at growth. There's other PMs that are really good at infrastructure. And ultimately, in today's world, when you have a successful business, you need to take all of those PMs types of people and put them together to get something where you have the complete set of skills that you need to run a complicated technology business.
By the way, is that competencies framework available anywhere?
It is. So it's available on my site, completely free. Just go to ravi-mehta.com and there's a link to it. There's a product toolkit link and you can download it right from there.
Cool. We will also add it to the comments. Thank you for that. So I also want to talk about your own personal learning journey. How do you learn? How do you make sure to block some time to continue growing as a leader?
Yeah, this was a really interesting question because I found, as I thought about it, I'm learning all the time. This is one of the things that I love most about product as a job and about working in tech is it's constantly changing. There's constantly new things to learn. The latest thing that I've been learning about is I just read recently about a company, Thrasio, which raised at $1 billion valuation. And their business is acquiring Amazon seller businesses. And so they've acquired 70 of these businesses so far. They bring the businesses together, they optimize the businesses, and they've quickly gotten to a point where they're profitable and they're growing very quickly. And for me, the Amazon seller landscape, all of the tools that Amazon makes available is something I knew nothing about. So for the past couple of days, I've been spending a lot of time reading about it, watching YouTube videos, just trying to understand it. I think I'm going to set up my own little store to see how the tools work. And that's really how I approach a lot of things. Over the last couple of months, I've spent time diving into the healthcare system. I've spent time learning Figma. I spent time brushing up my JavaScript skills. I've spent a lot of time learning how to write better. And the way that I've done it is kind of two things. One, I've moved away from books to a large extent, and now we're using Udemy and YouTube and podcasts and things of that sort. One of the reasons is I do a lot of my learning when I'm walking my dog. So that, now that I don't have a commute, that's the best time that I have during the day to really focus. And it's a great time to take a break and learn something new. So I, try to learn through those channels. There's so much great content out there today. And then the second thing that I like to do is I like to turn the learning into practice and try things out. So I've launched a couple of products over the years. With blogging, I've spent a lot of time focused on trying out different tools and using different tools, and both learning about things as well as taking some practical opportunity to build things is both fun, as a product builder to get to do that at various scales, but it's also a great way to solidify the learning that you have.
And I love that about product people. Like once you have that general curiosity about things, and that you can go in and tinker with certain tools. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be even an engineer or a designer. There's a lot of technology out there that's available, and tutorials and videos and Twitter accounts, like a lot of things that allow you to just play around and get dangerous enough before you decide what steps you want to take next. For me personally, when I read emails, that I look at them from a very different lens. I'm like, I like that title. I like that call to action. I almost, when I see a website, I'm thinking, what is the tool that they are using for whatever, and I try to investigate. I call it unstructured learning.
Yeah, I do the same thing. And a blog post in a lot of ways, I just tweeted about this recently. It's like shipping a mini product. Like if you're just writing a blog post, you have to think about what's the title? What do I want to write about? How do I want to design the post? What graphics do I want to include? How am I going to market the post? How do I grow the number of people that are going to see the post? What tools do I want to use? Then you got to look at the analytics and figure out how that informs your next post. And so there are so many opportunities, I think, for product builders to be able to do exactly what you said, which is, build products, but in little micro ways throughout their lives. And each time you do that, I think it helps you get better at thinking about it on a broader scale.
Let's talk about tools. What are some of the tools that you love personally, or that you've seen that are successful for product teams?
The thing I'm in love with right now, which I think is something that a lot of people are in love with, is Figma. I heard about it from someone at Amazon about a year ago, I think, or 9 months ago. And I thought, that's, I'll put that on my bucket list. That's something that I'd like to learn about one day. And then during COVID, I actually just took a Udemy course to learn how it works. And the company that I'm working a lot with today uses Figma for all of their design. They're a very design centric product team. So I've been in there more doing wireframes, providing comments on designs and things of that sort. And the thing that I really love about it is it's a few things. One, I always lamented the move from native software to the web, because I felt like web applications were never going to be as high fidelity as native apps. And of course we have, now we have mobile native apps, which are pretty high fidelity. I think Figma is the first app that I've used that's really redefined what you can do with a web app. The difference between it and a desktop app is there's almost no discernible difference. And so for me, that's really exciting that web apps have now gotten to the point where they are that high performance, that smooth, that well designed from a UX standpoint. So I really like that aspect of the tool. I think the other thing with web native tools is that they are just deeply collaborative in a way that desktop tools can't be in the same way. And so I think that making a design tool that is as collaborative as Figma has really changed how design teams work. You can now, instead of sharing out designs to stakeholders, designing becomes more of a dialogue between the different stakeholders and the designers, where you can walk people through designs in real time. They can change things, you can change things, they can comment. And so it's made a process that used to be a little bit waterfall in the sense that you'd do it and then share it, then do it, then share it. And it's made it a lot more streamlined, a lot more efficient, and given much deeper feedback loops, which I think will ultimately mean that design teams can do better work, and that overall product teams can feel like the designs for their products best reflect the latest thinking in terms of what's going to make the product successful.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of no code or low code tools. I think they're extremely powerful for non-designers or engineers, basically product people, to be able to better communicate and collaborate with teams of specialists. Personally, at Product School, we teach some of those tools in our curriculum, because the point is not to make you a designer or an engineer, but to understand how engineers or designers work. And hopefully, if you can be on the same page, that allows for much agile collaboration. I remember those days where, oh man, the learning curve to learn Photoshop was insane and probably not worth it. And PMs didn't know what designers use and vice versa. Now, I think there's much more transparency across the board.
What's your favorite no-code tool?
So I'm obsessed with Miro these days.
Okay, great.
Virtual board where we basically deliver feedback on Miro. We even create roadmaps, and it started very small, like me using this with a couple of people, and it scaled out. The entire organization is using it. So now it's kind of our default. Between that and honestly, Google Docs, that's fine.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see these tools really come to the point of maturity where, especially now, given that, we're so far apart, because of tools like Miro and Notion and Figma, it feels like you can really work as if you're in the same office, which I think is different than it was even just a few years ago.
Absolutely. Well, so Ravi, another thing that I think is very common in startup land here in Silicon Valley is doing things that don't scale, especially at the early stages of a company. But I think that also applies to later stages. So I'm curious, for you as a leader, is there anything in particular that you still want to invest time on, even though you know that doesn't scale, but it's so core to your values and to the impact that you're making in the company that you also want to, spend more time?
Yeah, there's actually two things that I do that I know don't scale, but I feel like are so important to the product process. So even when I've had larger teams and I don't need to do this stuff firsthand, the two things that I like to do firsthand are participate in user interviews and then wireframing. And so for user interviews, I think especially what happens at larger companies is you get further and further away from the customer. You get closer and closer to the data because you have more data to work with. And that provides some proxy into what customers want. But it's not the same as talking to a customer. I've used the analogy that data is kind of like watching a silent black and white movie. It can tell you the broad brushstrokes of the story, but talking to a customer is like adding color and sound to that movie experience. It's a much more immersive, and you get a much more deep, empathetic understanding of customers. So in every role that I've had, I've spent some time either directly talking to customers or listening into user interviews and helping to structure user research. It's something that I've been doing actually of increasing frequency, not less frequency, as I've gotten more senior. And I've found it's just a great way to take you outside of the very abstract thinking around, what's our product trying to do, and then zoom into like one particular person's need and understand how do you solve for that. With the healthcare company that I'm working with right now, they're a fantastic team that's doing user research every week. So there's just constant conversations happening with customers. And it's really enlightening as well as like inspiring to talk to patients that are dealing with the healthcare system and see the pain that they're going through, both because they have a health issue and because there's this terrible system to work with. And so it's a great way to really understand deeply, what you need to solve for. There's always the argument that doesn't scale, or, you can't take one person's experience and extrapolate it to a million people. And I think to some extent that's true, but I found it's more often the case that you lose the quality of information by looking at a data set of, a million points of data versus, having a single point of data and then extrapolating that to a larger set of people.
Yeah, and I think it's also a humbling experience sometimes to look at your own product through other people's eyes and validate certain things that might be, not that obvious to other people. We're going through a user study right now, and like you'd be surprised, some of the things that I was absolutely convinced that they are the way they are yeah, just different. And I'm glad that we are going through this. At the very beginning, it felt almost like it touched my ego because I was like,
yeah.
oh my God, I'm not as good as I used to think I was. But no, it's part of the learning process.
It's great. It's much better to get the learning at that phase than to get it at the phase after you built a product and you're testing it and you're saying, oh, wow, it doesn't work in the way that we thought it would. And so, yeah, you have to be like thoughtful about how to take in those customer conversations and what to listen to and what not to listen to. But at the same time, I don't think there's any replacement for those one-on-one conversations.
I agree. And another thing that I think is challenging, especially as product teams grow, is how to balance the influence that you want to have versus the influence that other product people will have. So in your experience, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think there's a very common tension within organizations, and it comes from two things. Leaders within an organization want to have control. So they have a lot of responsibility. They've got to deliver numbers. And for them to be successful, they have to feel like they have a sense of control over where the company is going or where the product is going. Teams want to have autonomy. Teams are filled with smart people, highly engaged people, and they want to have the autonomy to know, what they're trying to accomplish and then figure out the path to accomplish those things. And if you can achieve both of those at the same time, you can have, a leader that feels like they have control and a team that feels like they have autonomy. That's really the best outcome. And that's like a scalable leadership model. I think if you look at companies like Amazon, they've absolutely nailed that. They've got a great ability to define key moments during a product lifecycle when executives get involved. And in between those moments, they give, once they have the context of what teams are accomplishing, they give the teams the resources to go and do those things. And I think it's one of the reasons that Amazon has been able to succeed in so many different types of markets. There's no way that Jeff Bezos or any other executive at Amazon can be an expert in every single thing that Amazon does. But by having a really great framework for defining goals, describing the strategy around those goals, evaluating next steps in terms of resourcing for those goals, they can add the ability for leaders to have that broad strategic context, have the control over where the company is going, and then provide the resourcing so that very disparate teams that are working on disparate problems can go deep on those problems, understand them really well, and succeed. I think what often happens in companies is that if leaders don't feel like they have control, the first thing to lose is teams lose autonomy, and leaders will come in and micromanage the team until they feel like they have control. And that's okay. There are times when micromanagement does work. Jerry Seinfeld was recently quoted as saying, like, one of the reasons his show was so good was because he micromanaged everything. There are famous tech leaders like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg who do micromanage. They have a reputation for that. So it's okay if that happens from time to time. It's just not scalable once a company gets to a certain size. And it's not scalable as well because teams don't necessarily want to work on products where they don't have some degree of autonomy. So I think it's really important for both leaders and teams to understand that tension between those 2 points and set up a system so that leaders have provided enough strategic context, enough guardrails for teams to be able to operate within those guardrails and succeed within those guardrails. And then for teams to understand those guardrails well enough to know where the leaders want them to go, and what guardrails they're supposed to stay into, but also feel like they have the autonomy to figure out the way to get there.
So just as to wrap up this interview, I want to talk a little bit about the future. Where do you think are the biggest opportunities for people in product?
I think the biggest opportunity for people in product has been such a broad role. If you look at other roles within tech, particularly engineering, we've seen over time that engineering has specialized into front end and back end and infrastructure, and a number of other specialties. I think we will begin to see the same thing. I think we're already seeing the same thing within the product role, where there are different types of product work that can be done at different stages of a company or need to be done all in parallel at a stage in a company. And different people will be more or less qualified to do that work or more or less interested in doing that work. At Tinder, one of the first things that we did when I got there is we reorganized the team into 3 pillars. There's an innovation pillar, a growth pillar, and then a platform pillar. And that was really meant to capture the fact that there really are 3 distinct types of work at a minimum within a product organization. One is growing the product as it exists today. So taking the product market fit that a company has and expanding it to as many users as possible. There's been a lot of great work to establish growth as a sub-discipline within product. I think that's only going to continue to happen. Growth PMs tend to be more quantitative than other PMs and work in a more scientific way, which is great. It's an important thing. But oftentimes working in that very scientific way and using the data as the guide can lead to things that feel too incremental, and where teams aren't thinking enough about, what does the future look like and how do we disrupt ourselves? And that's where I think innovation teams come into play. And innovation teams are really good at talking to customers and looking at what's happening in the tech landscape and sussing out where does our product need to go next, so that companies are really good at disrupting themselves rather than getting disrupted by other players. And then the third piece, which I think is important, is the infrastructure and the operational piece. We're seeing that, now that these businesses are running at such a large scale, there are really important operational problems that need to be solved, whether it's privacy or trust and safety or content moderation or community moderation. And the ability to create the systems, the processes, the tools to do that well is a specialized skill set. And certain PMs do that really, really well. And so within Tinder, there's now 3 leaders of those 3 different pillars. Each one of them is exceptional at their particular job, but those people aren't necessarily interchangeable. You couldn't take the head of platform and make that person the head of growth. And that's, I think, emblematic of where a product is going overall, where there will be these specialties. And so I think it's really important for PMs as they think about their career to do a self-assessment, to understand what are the things that they perform really well in, what are the types of challenges that they really gravitate towards, and to build themselves up as a specialist within, it can be one of those 3 things or in another area, so that their career is sort of aligned with what they're really good at and where they can add the most value.
Well, Ravi, it's been great to share this time with you and learn from you. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap things up?
I think we're at an incredibly exciting time now for product builders and product managers. COVID has changed so much about the world and added so many challenges. And technology, I think, has already played a really important role in being part of helping us work within this new normal. It's only going to continue to happen. There's going to be more challenges to solve, more problems to solve, more opportunities to take advantage of. And so I think it's a really exciting time to be a product person. I've been doing it a long time, and I couldn't be more excited today than I ever have been in the past. And so excited for everyone who's listening to think about what their role in that next chapter of technology is going to look like.
Thank you for that positive message. And let's keep building cool stuff. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.